Good afternoon on this side. Can I just try that again? Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My parents are from Trinidad and Tobago, right? And I thought when I would be a young man and go and visit Trinidad, I would pick up the phone when someone would call, and I would say hello, which is very customary here of what we do. And the conversation I would learn wouldn't start until the morning greeting was said, either good morning, either good afternoon, good evening, or good night. And so when I am often in spaces in which we are about to be together in a shared space, it reminds me of how we start a conversation with those greetings of good morning, good evening, and good night. So good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I want to share a little bit about myself. I wanted to talk about rediscovering what it means to have solidarity and community, and I want to bring an international context home here to Hamilton. That's a lot to unpack in about 6 to 8 minutes, but I'm going to try. And I'm going to ask you to keep me on time and just put up your hand as I start to move a little bit longer than I probably should. So I'm going to watch you over there in the corner. Thank you. So in order to talk about rediscovering solidarity, I want to tell you how I found it. I want to start there. For me, it was a conversation with my mother many years ago. And it was a conversation in which she shared with me when she experienced what I would describe as racism, but that she would describe as solidarity. My mother came here in 1972, and she worked at a plant on down on Barton Street in the North End on Lottridge. That plant is no longer here today, and that's a conversation that I'm going to weave into this conversation as a part of as we go on. But what she experienced was, one day she went to work, and a person gave her what she described as a pink slip. And for those who might know what that means, it's the sense of being laid off, fired, let go. And she had shown up continuously in her community, but she also showed up continuously to work. That was her place of bringing income into her home. That was how she went about providing a roof over her head. And she didn't understand why that happened. And so she went home that day, didn't say anything to her coworkers, wasn't angry, upset, but simply went home. And then the days went by, the next day, the day after, and finally on that Friday, someone called and said, "Hey, we haven't seen you at work. Are you okay? What's going on?" And she described to her friend, who would often drive her to and from work, that she had received a pink slip. She had been effectively let go. No one else at the plant had received that pink slip. No one else had been told that they weren't needed. No one else was told, "Thank you for showing up, but it's time to go." And they said, "What? Why? This doesn't make any sense." And so that person went back and spoke to the people on the line, predominantly women, and said, "Did you know why she's not here? Do you know what happened?" And the next day, all the workers came together and they stopped. They stopped literally doing the work. They decided to shut down that line that day. And so when the managers came on and said, "Why are people not working? What is happening here today?" they explained, "Why isn't she here? We want an explanation why that person's not in the room, and we want something done about it." The person said, "I'm not aware of what's going on, but we're going to look into this." And they did. And they called my mother, and they said, "This is what we've been told by colleagues on the line, that they're not going back to work until this is resolved." And she said, "I'm glad someone's looking into this." They said, "Okay, we want you to come back to work, and I'm going to look into this, but coming to work." She did. And then they said, "I didn't realize what had happened, and we recognize what happened was wrong, and we're going to make sure that this is taken care of, and that you're taken care of." And she got her job back. Wow. And the person who had provided that pink slip was let go. And so when my mom told me that story, I said, "Mom, that sounded pretty racist to me." And she was like, "I think you're missing the point of the story as well, Lyndon, which is that in that moment, it brought people together to also stand up." My mom also said that during that time, she also could have used a break, and that week was a relief. It's an interesting way of framing it. And so when we talk about rediscovering solidarity, that story stays with me in so many ways. About people who took action when they could, how they stood up in that moment, they decided that accountability was needed, and that in that moment, so much more was done. And I thought about it afterwards thinking, what if they hadn't done that? What happens to a young family where you're making close to $21, $22 an hour in the 1970s and 1980s? What does that mean for a single mom who's trying to raise 2 children? What kind of bitterness and resentment is formed in our communities when those moments happen and no one says anything? It leads to so many other outcomes. But what I do know is that it led to the outcome in the role that I'm in here today. It allows me to also recognize that in those moments, we need to be there for one another. And we can't turn a blind eye to so much that injustice happens in our local community, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our families, and to those who are in the room here today. And so I wanted to start by sharing that story in a way that often, sometimes, we don't hear the personal side of the work that we do and what brings us to it. In this world right now, we are looking at a time in which I believe the rise of fascism is happening both here and abroad, to our neighbors to the south. And we've seen how the economic impacts of those conversations are playing out when it comes to those who use that moment to exploit, to sow fear, to sow division, and to be able to divide us. And the truth of the matter is, it kind of feels, personally, from 2016, that they've been successful in their narrative. And that's a hard thing for me to say. But it feels like we need to have that solidarity now more than ever in order to stand up to the rise of hate, discrimination, and racism that we see playing out, not just only south of the border, but here at home in our community. Our organization supports individuals who experience racism. And last year, we saw a rise in hate symbols in our community, directly connected to purposeful activities of white nationalism, extremism, who are out here sharing their information, intending to sow fear and division. And some people see those symbols and think that they're isolated, or that they're just a sticker campaign, and that they're out there, and that these individuals are misguided, that they are, we don't want to give them attention. But they are organized, and they are following a global movement of hate that is going on in this world right now, and we need to acknowledge it. We are not fanning those flames. The flames are here. I'm not trying to be grandiose. I'm not trying to oversell it. But I tell you that when we see these campaigns and we watch their videos online and see what they are doing, they are intent on starting what they call a race war, to sow that division. These are their words, not mine. And so when we offer this support in community, it is intended for us to also address the root causes of what hate looks like and why it's rising. Started off by sharing about on Burlington Street where my mom worked, and that's an economic conversation. And that's a part of the conversation that I want to talk about here today, with the limited time that I have. And I talked about the wage that came home, and we've seen wage suppression for a long time here. And in fact, in Hamilton, we can say from the development of NAFTA, a North American Free Trade Agreement. And right now, we are having conversations about how that agreement is remade. And the word agreement is a part of that solidarity. You see, what I'm talking about is that when we talk about agreements, we can watch our leaders talk on literally TV or online to say that our neighbors to the south are not agreeing to the agreements that are in place. And then these individuals who are spreading hate and discrimination are saying that it is the newcomers in the community, it is the rise of those who've come from Asia, from Africa, from North and South America, from all over, that are causing this disruption. And the reason why you can't get a job, the reason why there is no opportunity, is not because of an agreement, because of those, the other. And that is part of the discussion of how they are scapegoating and marginalizing newcomer communities here today. And those who have been here, and who live here and come here with the hope and dreams that many of us have here today. And it makes me want to talk about an agreement and what it really means fundamentally. Because those words matter. The reason why we had an election and the outcome of it was ultimately because of how we are with our neighbors to the south. A lot of that was the impact. And we're not having a conversation about the injustices of agreements. Here in Hamilton, we saw that, where many jobs were then left and went to other far places in the world in which the lower economic standard allowed them to then share those goods back here. And we were told that for a generation like myself, that that would be okay. And the repercussions of that are a part of what is happening in our communities. And we need to acknowledge that these agreements have not lived up to an economic sharing and prosperity that we were promised to. And we need to have that in a real way that we talk about as part of this conversation of agreements. Now, I'm not going to go on in length. I'm not here to talk about free trade policy. But what I'm saying is that when we talk about agreements, when we talk about solidarity, we can't leave people out and expect them to simply come along afterwards. We have to have those conversations. We need to understand how those policies are being weaponized in certain corridors to scapegoat others. It's a fundamental conversation we need to continue to have about how we bring people in, how we create housing that is affordable for people to live, that there's an economics that works for folks. That's a part of dealing with the root causes of what we're seeing here today.
I'm very, very
Hands up.
reluctantly putting my hand up.
So I'm coming to the end. So my point here today is to talk about the injustice and the legacy of these agreements. When we talk about indigenous communities who have seen from history how these agreements have not been lived up to, we need to acknowledge that. Not far from here at Six Nations, there was an agreement between them as well, right? 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. Over 950,000 acres were promised in an agreement in which many indigenous communities who were in upstate New York during the American Revolution were promised that land for being part of fighting on the side of the crown. Those are long legacies of injustice and agreements that they know all too well have not been lived up to, and have economic and prosperity conversations for indigenous communities as well. We need to remember that these agreements are part of a structure that we need to address as part of our combat to address hate and discrimination in our community as well. Thank you for this time, and thank you for the opportunity.